I can't believe you. My wife cried when I refused to stay in a loveless marriage. My friends stayed silent. Until I made one choice that changed everything. The person I loved left. My wife, 35F, and I, 35M, have been married for 15 years and together for 20. We have 2 children, 12 and 14, whom we adore, and we work hard to provide them with the best life possible. Over the past 3 years, however, our relationship has hit a rough patch. I understand that raising kids at this stage demands a lot of our time and energy, with school, band, sports, and extracurriculars, and I recognize the strain this can place on a marriage. That said, intimacy between us has been minimal during this time, including a noticeable lack of physical affection. We've been actively trying to address this issue, but this past year has been the most challenging. We barely spoke, and our relationship felt more like cohabitation than a marriage. It became emotionally draining and disheartening, to the point where we even considered divorce. The atmosphere at home felt heavy and bleak as a result. In an effort to mend things, we sought help through individual and couples therapy, which brought some improvements. Gradually, we started communicating more and discussing what we wanted from our marriage. However, things took a difficult turn when my wife admitted that she was no longer in love with me. She saw me as a best friend rather than a romantic partner. She said her feelings were purely platonic, which explained her lack of desire for intimacy. Hearing this was devastating. I felt heartbroken, angry, and deeply unwanted by the person I still loved. As tensions rose, our progress unraveled, and we found ourselves back at square one. One afternoon, I sat down with her for an honest conversation, trying to understand where this disconnect stemmed from. Her response was vague, she wasn't sure. She mentioned harboring resentment toward me but couldn't pinpoint the reason. This left me feeling lost, unsure of how to move forward. Now, we've reached a point where she expresses having no interest in intimacy or emotional connection. She says all she wants is companionship, which essentially means maintaining our current co-parenting roommate dynamic. When I ask what I can do differently or what about me she finds unappealing, her answer remains, I don't know. She insists she still loves me, but not in the same way. She has felt disconnected for years and finds our marriage exhausting. Her sole focus is on the children, and while she acknowledges my role as a co-parent, it seems that's all she values in our relationship right now. I'm feeling lost and mostly just venting my frustration. It's incredibly difficult to accept that the person I love no longer has romantic feelings for me. At this point, I feel like my role in her life is limited to being a financial provider and a co-parent. When she says she wants companionship, it seems to mean that she values the stability I bring as a good father and my financial contributions to the household. However, when it comes to intimacy or sex, she has made it clear that she has no interest in either at this time. She even mentioned that the only way she could engage in any form of intimacy is if she were intoxicated, which I find deeply unsettling and wrong. I told her that forcing herself to be intimate through drinking or smoking isn't healthy, and I refused to be part of that. To my surprise, this response upset her and made her even more distant. We've always been open and honest with each other. Neither of us has ever cheated, and we have full access to each other's phones, emails, and social media, though we rarely feel the need to check. I even asked her directly if there was someone else, and she said no. Honestly, I believe her. To clear any doubts, we both went through each other's devices, and as expected, nothing was out of place. We've always tackled difficult conversations head-on, so I don't suspect any infidelity or hidden motives. Am I wrong for refusing to engage in intimacy only when she's intoxicated? I firmly stand by my decision not to participate in only when I'm high or drunk sex because it just doesn't sit right with me. But beyond that, I don't know how to fix this situation, and it's making me increasingly anxious and desperate. We're both still young, healthy, and successful in our careers. We're also great parents. So how did we end up here? I'd really appreciate some outside perspectives or advice on how to navigate this. It's painful to feel so unwanted and undesirable in my own marriage, and I honestly hate it. TLDR, my wife of 15+ years no longer feels in love with me and doesn't know why. She says she can only be intimate while intoxicated, or I need to accept a platonic, sexless marriage. I have no idea how to move forward and could use some insight or advice. Relevant comments/missing reasons. Some commenters looked into my history and discovered that my wife and I were involved in swinging in the past. Yes, we did explore swinging for a period of time, and while it was enjoyable back then, we mutually decided to stop. We've already established that this isn't the root of our current issues. In fact, during the time we were swinging, our marriage actually felt like it was in a good place. This is something we were completely upfront about with our couples therapist to ensure we weren't overlooking any potential underlying issues. I even asked my wife directly if her experiences from swinging have influenced how she now views our relationship. She assured me that it hasn't. Our involvement in that lifestyle was always a shared experience, purely physical, and never emotional or polyamorous in nature. At the end of the day, I have no choice but to take her at her word. She has always been upfront and unafraid to address difficult topics, no matter how uncomfortable they may be. If this is a consequence of swinging. The truth is, this issue existed long before we ever tried swinging. That said, I completely understand that swinging wasn't a long-term solution, nor was it ever intended to be. It was more of an exploratory phase to see if she would feel differently about intimacy. We had an agreement that if she found she had no issues with other men but still had no desire for intimacy with me, we would have an open and honest conversation and, if necessary, amicably part ways. However, that never happened. She didn't enjoy sex or intimacy in that environment either. She was always in control of our swinging experiences, and I willingly went along with it because I trusted her judgment. In a way, it was her effort to understand herself and our relationship better. If it turned out that I was the issue, I was prepared to accept that. But in the end, that wasn't the case. Did this start when the swinging ended? Finally, someone brought up the swinging topic with actual insight. You're absolutely right, swinging did have an impact on our marriage, though not necessarily in the way most people assume. One of the most valuable things we gained from it wasn't the sexual aspect but the level of deep, open communication it required. We found ourselves having incredibly meaningful conversations, and we carried that level of transparency into every area of our lives, including parenting. Even my wife acknowledges that this was one of the best takeaways from the experience. When we decided to stop, it wasn't because of a bad experience, it just felt like the natural thing to do. In fact, the night before we officially stopped, we met up with a couple we had a strong connection with. We genuinely enjoyed their friendship, even outside of the lifestyle, and continued to spend time together in a purely platonic way. My wife admitted that swinging wasn't making sex any more enjoyable for her, so we both agreed there was no point in continuing. I was on the same page, and we moved on. To this day, we're still friends with some of the people we met because we truly value the friendships we built. That being said, I know that, for many couples, swinging can create significant problems. However, for us, it was simply one of the ways we tried to work through an issue that had existed long before we ever explored that lifestyle. I see it as a practical approach we took to try and find a solution. Unfortunately, it didn't change the underlying problem. Update. I wanted to share an update on how this week's therapy session with my wife went. I'm not sure if this will be helpful, but I took many of the comments, suggestions, and insights from my initial post and used them to structure key points for discussion with our couple's therapist. My goal was to address the core issues that may be contributing to our current struggles. One of the recurring themes in our conversations has been resentment. It's been really difficult for me to process the fact that my wife keeps saying she feels resentful but isn't sure why or how this is affecting her emotionally and mentally. I brought this up again with our therapist and revisited our long history together, how we've been married for 15 years and have been together since we were 14. We also discussed how having children at such a young age, she was 19, I was 20, drastically altered the course of our lives. We went through extreme financial hardship, had very little social life for over a decade, and were completely consumed by parenting. Our kids are now 12 and 14. The therapist then directed a lot of questions to my wife about her feelings regarding this, and I noticed that nearly all of her responses revolved around the kids. It seemed like she was hesitant to openly acknowledge that certain aspects of our life were difficult, almost as if admitting that would make her feel guilty or ashamed, as though it implied she regretted having children. I brought this up during the session, and our therapist encouraged her to step outside the role of a mother for a moment and think about her feelings from an individual perspective. That shift in perspective was eye-opening. My wife admitted that she feels frustrated about everything she missed out on in life. However, she was very clear in saying, "I don't feel like I missed out on dating or partying, but I did lose all my friends." This was a significant breakthrough because one of the biggest strains in our relationship has been the sense of isolation we've both felt, largely due to how much time we spent focused on raising our children. I reminded her how important friendships are and encouraged her to prioritize making time for herself and rebuilding those connections. For over 3 years, we've had multiple discussions about the value of friendships, how having peers with shared experiences can offer support and guidance, as well as simply bring joy. Despite this, my wife has consistently avoided forming or maintaining friendships, even though she thrives on external social interaction. The reason she gives for this? The kids. As I mentioned earlier, almost every answer she gives ties back to them in some way. At this point in our session, I began noticing a pattern. Many of her frustrations and challenges seem to have a common denominator: our children. So I asked her directly, "Do you think you're upset with me because I got you pregnant so young?" I wasn't prepared for her answer, but she admitted that, yes, she does feel resentment toward me for that. She immediately followed up by acknowledging that she knows it's not entirely fair because, as she put it takes two to tango. Even though this was a tough realization, I felt like it was progress. At least now, we have something tangible to work on. To help ease some of these feelings of resentment, we agreed to actively invest more time in building strong friendships, both together as a couple and individually. Towards the end of the session, we began to discuss what actionable items we would take from this session. At this point, it was still all very ambiguous and blurry as to what the outcomes were. I was very direct and very forward in asking my wife what her plan is moving forward. Note, I had decided prior to the session that should my wife say the same thing about being a co-parenting roommate that I would take the 180 approach and essentially do me. She started basically saying the same thing, that she doesn't have any desire to be intimate or sexual with me as of now and that she loves me immensely and she feels bad for not being there for me, as mentioned in my first post. I also brought up the brief swinging that happened, to which for the 50th time said it wasn't a problem. I agree with her on this. This was something that was a mechanical approach for a solution to a problem that was very much inexistent when we tried this. We, both, really have no issue to this. We know it happened, we tried it and mutually stopped and turned the page. I also brought up other life events that may cause resentment and really we ended up not getting anywhere else as far as the root for resentment, which was discouraging. I made it clear to my wife that I was not okay with the current arrangement. I told her that I had done everything I could, and at this point, the issue was no longer about me or anything I needed to change on my end. I was direct in saying that I would not accept this dynamic and that I needed to be with someone who was actively engaged in our marriage, willing to work through issues, and invested in maintaining both emotional and physical intimacy. I emphasized that I refused to be just a convenience and that life was about more than just being roommates and co-parents. At the same time, I reassured her that I love her deeply and genuinely want our relationship to work. I also made it clear that I was fully committed to our marriage, so long as she was too. However, if she wasn't willing to put in the effort, I told her that while I would respect her decision, I would not stay in a relationship where my efforts weren't reciprocated. I stressed that I had no intention of leaving or seeking a divorce, but if things continued as they were, that would be the inevitable outcome. The conversation was emotional, and the session ended on a very somber note, leaving me feeling discouraged. Still, nothing changed, and as I left, I felt determined to start implementing the 180 approach immediately. It was painful, especially because this method required me to be distant, brief, and transactional, but the sad reality was that our relationship had already become that way. This is where things took an interesting turn. That very day, I began applying the 180 principles. I told my wife, things are going to be different moving forward. I will respect the roommate/co-parent dynamic as you've established it, without protest. But let there be no mistake, I am not happy with this, and I will never be okay with it. However, I am done trying to fix something if you're unwilling to work on it. She agreed and went to bed. From that point on, I created distance and shifted my focus entirely to myself. I kept conversations minimal and strictly necessary. When she asked for help with personal matters, I declined, which visibly shocked her. She was upset and accused me of being petty. I explained that she was now responsible for her own life and issues, just as I was focusing on mine. We barely spoke for the next few days, and as I kept my distance, she became visibly more upset and stressed. Normally, I would have responded with comfort and support, but this time, I didn't. One night, she broke down in tears, saying she felt overwhelmed and that something seemed wrong with me because I was acting indifferent. I listened, then simply reminded her that this was the dynamic she had chosen, and like her, I was prioritizing myself. I won't lie, it has been incredibly difficult to be distant and cold, especially because I love her and wish I could hold her and show affection. But deep down, I know this shift in behavior is her way of trying to regain control without truly addressing our issues. She wants to keep me in the friend zone while still maintaining her chosen dynamic. So, despite the difficulty, I've remained firm in my approach. We're now approaching a week of implementing the 180, and let's just say, there have been a lot of changes on her end. It seems like she's starting to realize that I'm more than just a friend and co-parent. A few days ago, I sent her a message outlining our financial responsibilities and splitting the bills 50/50ths. Her reaction? She completely lost it. She told me it came out of nowhere, to which I simply replied, "Friends split things evenly, and as your friend, I expect nothing less." This moment was incredibly eye-opening because it made me see just how much I've been taken for granted. It became clear that she had been comfortable at my expense, without really acknowledging it. Regardless, I stood my ground and reminded her that this was the dynamic she had chosen, and, in reality, it was still a bargain compared to handling everything on her own. To sum it up, while the 180 has been effective in many ways, I still feel deeply saddened by the overall situation. There have been some harsh realizations and difficult conversations, but at the same time, it has also sparked a shift in her. She's been putting in more effort to engage with me, and while it's tough to resist, I do hope that if we move forward, this continues. Another positive change I've noticed is that she's finally making time for herself beyond just being a mom, which is huge considering how much she's neglected her own needs for years. Seeing her reconnect with herself has been really encouraging. Ultimately, as we both work on ourselves, I hope our marriage improves. However, at this point, there's no way to predict where this will lead. We remain cordial and amicable, which is a good sign. Boundaries are in place, expectations are clear, and I know that no matter what happens, I'll be at peace with the effort I've put in. We're continuing couples therapy, whether that leads to rekindling our marriage or parting ways. Having an objective third party has been incredibly helpful in guiding us through this process. One thing remains certain: I will always love my wife, but I refuse to stay in a marriage without intimacy or connection because we both deserve better. I appreciate all the kind words, advice, and support. This will be my final update on this topic, and I sincerely wish you all the best. TLDR, my wife placed me in the friend zone and wanted to co-parent while still relying on me financially. I implemented the 180 method to shift the dynamic since she wasn't making an effort to fix things. It seems to be pulling her out of her rut and has helped me gain clarity on how she truly feels. Therapy has been invaluable, and I highly recommend it to all couples. Update. I went back and forth for a long time about whether to share an update on the situation. A lot has changed, and I felt it would be beneficial not only to update you all but also to process everything in a structured way for myself. It has now been almost 9 weeks since I started implementing the 180 method, and it has led to some noticeable changes in my wife's behavior. As I mentioned in previous posts, she began to recognize the things she had previously taken for granted, started asking more about my whereabouts, and took note of the fact that I was spending more time with the kids, often without her. Eventually, she started inviting herself along, and I didn't turn her down. A lot has shifted, and overall, it seems to be for the better. This past Memorial Day weekend, she asked me if I wanted to go out for coffee because she had something important to discuss. This was huge because I genuinely can't remember the last time she initiated a meaningful conversation with me. I won't lie, I was nervous. My mind was racing with all the possible scenarios of what she might want to say. Still, I agreed, and we took some time away from the kids to sit down and talk at a local coffee shop. The conversation turned out to be incredibly constructive. She opened up and shared a lot of insights about where she is emotionally and mentally, which helped me better understand her current state of mind. We talked through the core issues we've been facing, and, this was new, she actually asked for my help. Hearing that level of sincerity from her, after more than 2 years of feeling disconnected, was both surprising and encouraging. Once she finished expressing her thoughts, I shared a plan I had been considering for a while. I had originally intended to bring it up later if things weren't improving, but since our conversation naturally aligned with the help she was asking for, it felt like the right moment. I started by acknowledging her feelings and concerns, validating them as her personal experience, and emphasizing that I care about how she feels. The thought of her being unhappy or struggling emotionally is not something I take lightly. I also reaffirmed my commitment to reconciliation, reminding her that my ultimate goal has always been to rebuild our relationship and honor the vows we made to each other. My love for her remains as strong, if not stronger, than the day we said, "I do." From there, I opened up about my own perspective on everything, details of which I've shared in previous posts, and explained how the situation has been affecting me on a daily basis. She also brought up that my recent distant and transactional demeanor had been weighing on her, so I took the opportunity to clarify my intentions. I explained that my behavior wasn't meant to be personal, I was simply protecting myself emotionally from the constant feelings of rejection and neglect. I reminded her that, ultimately, I can't control her actions, I can only control my own. This was a perfect segue to the core of this approach, which is focused on self-accountability. I told her that for the longest time I was always working hard to make her happy and do things that I knew she enjoyed or wanted. However, I was always met with rejection and disappointment, which caused a load of stress on me. I explained to her that I had to make a change for myself. After all, I can only control myself and make the changes that I want for myself. I mentioned how I was starting to implement new habits and routines that help edify me, all while still executing all of our shared responsibilities, including parenting, finances, and daily living activities. I explained that the goal is to continue to improve myself both as a husband and father, learn more, and be healthier, among other things. She was very receptive to this. She told me that she sees what I'm doing and that she is proud of the changes she has seen. She also told me how she's starting to realize that she feels left behind and that much of the things that have affected her negatively are her own fault. Toward the end of the conversation, which was about 3 hours, there was a very high spirit of reconciliation in the room. I told her that my goal is to ultimately make this work, however I was very clear that I was not going to live under the current circumstances. I told her that my heart wants her to be happy even if it means elsewhere and that I also deserve to be happy myself. I also explained that I do not want our children to grow up thinking this was okay or normal because they deserve better as well. She told me she doesn't either. She told me she doesn't know what to do, to which I replied, let's set some clear goals. However, the goals will be for ourselves, not for each other. So, here is what we established. We are in charge of our own happiness. The key here is that she's not responsible for making me happy, and vice versa. We both need to seek what that personal plan looks like individually. Also, we're both encouraged to include each other in taking those steps if we want, but it is not required. We are each responsible for our own lives and personal growth. This means that finding the resources necessary to heal, evolve, and improve is up to us as individuals. While we can offer support when requested, unsolicited advice or assistance will not be given. Communication is a shared responsibility. If something isn't voiced or discussed, then for all intents and purposes, it never happened. Since neither of us can read minds, we must take accountability when we fail to communicate effectively. We created a list of needs and wants to provide clarity on how we can support each other. This list is meant to guide us in understanding what we are willing to do, compromise on, or choose not to engage in. However, it is not a checklist for accountability. We agreed that it should never be used as a tool for arguments, nor should we feel obligated to adhere to it. Instead, the list serves as a reference for transparency and growth. The key takeaway is that any action taken should be because we genuinely want to do it out of care and love, not just to fulfill an obligation. Lasting change cannot be forced. Real transformation happens when someone believes it's truly important. Setting a deadline, Memorial Day 2025. To ensure we have a clear benchmark for progress, we set Memorial Day 2025 as a deadline to reassess our relationship and individual happiness. At that point, we will make an independent decision about whether we want to continue together. If either of us determines that we are still unhappy, we will move forward with a divorce. We also agreed to take full responsibility for our choices leading up to that point. If either of us feels that our needs were unmet, it will not be framed as, my partner failed me, but rather, my partner chose not to meet my needs. This mindset ensures that both of us take ownership of our actions and inactions. Additionally, we committed to asking ourselves an important question: did we do everything possible to address our concerns? If the answer is yes, then we can move forward knowing that we left no stone unturned. However, if we did not fully address the issues, it would mean that those concerns were either not important enough to us or that we chose not to prioritize them. This principle applies equally to both of us in all aspects of the relationship. Ultimately, the foundation of change should come from within. If we genuinely work on ourselves, we will naturally begin to see positive changes in how we treat one another. The goal is not to meet each other's needs out of obligation but because we want to, because making the other person happy brings us joy. I made it clear to her that moving forward, we are no longer required to do things for each other. Instead, it should always be a choice, something we want to do out of love and care, rather than duty or expectation. Overall, I found our conversation to be incredibly positive and productive. There were plenty of tears, heartfelt moments, and genuine connection. While this doesn't guarantee anything, it was a significant breakthrough, one that I attribute to the 180 method. Since this was the only change I made, I believe it played a crucial role in shifting our dynamic for the better. However, now that our approach has evolved, I've decided to move forward in a new direction. My focus will be on personal growth as well as actively working on her needs and wants, not out of obligation, but because I want her to be happy by my side. She has also committed to doing the same for herself. We agreed to support each other wherever help is needed and to approach our relationship as a team. One of the most noticeable changes is her dedication to therapy and mental health. She has started taking antidepressants, which have had a positive impact on her well-being. Her confidence has improved, and she's in a much better mood more often. We're also rebuilding intimacy, through physical touch, words of affirmation, and even reintroducing sex into our relationship, which, after a long period of abstinence, felt a bit awkward at first. On top of that, we've started working out together, leading to weight loss and an overall boost in energy. Communication has also improved significantly, and I'm excited to see where this journey takes us. I hope sharing my experience helps someone out there. I truly appreciate all the support and insights many of you have provided along the way. Trolls aside, this community has played a huge role in giving me hope and guidance through this difficult time. Moving forward, I won't be providing further updates until Memorial Day next year, as I want to fully focus on myself, my wife, and the opportunities that lie ahead. Wishing you all the best in life and in your relationships. TLDR, our marriage has improved significantly since implementing the 180 method. We're now committed to working on ourselves and rebuilding our relationship. We've also set a deadline for next year to determine whether we'll stay together or separate.